Hello, everybody. We had some technical difficulties this morning. We are waiting for the participants to file in. We'll give it a minute or two, and then we'll get started. My apologies. Thanks for joining us this morning. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get going. My name is Matt Smith. I'm the director of Offshore Wind for the Hampton Roads Alliance. We are partnering, as always, with Dominion Energy on our CVOW Friday Forums. So welcome to the September Friday Forums. These are a series of events where businesses and other interests in Virginia and elsewhere can learn about opportunities related to the CVOW project and offshore wind in general. So today we have a great panel for you. It includes GT Hollett, the project manager for the CVOW project, and Carl Humberson, director of project construction. So we will be providing, they will be providing a project update for you all. We started out this series in February with that project update. A lot has happened since then, and we wanted to come back to you all with more information about that. Before we get to GT and Carl, I do want to give a quick update about some of the supply chain activities that have been happening in Virginia. Many of you all are aware that the Business Network for Offshore Wind's International Partnering Forum was held in Richmond, Virginia, just in late August. So that was really a great opportunity for Virginia to show its assets, for Virginia companies to make connections within the business with people in the offshore wind industry and others to learn about these Virginia businesses. Great event, well attended, and was a success by sponsors like Dominion Energy. The Alliance and partners also hosted a weekend ahead of IPF, where 16 of the companies that will be building out the offshore wind supply chain came to Hampton Roads. They were able to see the assets of Hampton Roads, meet our local partners, and really hear Virginia's vision for offshore wind, including from Governor Northam at a reception during that event. So lots of positive activity around offshore wind and the supply chain in Virginia. And with that, I am going to turn things over to GT and Carl. Take it away, folks. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having us today. So Carl and I have a handful of slides that will sort of show while we're giving you an update, but want to make this conversational. So I know there'll be an opportunity to throw questions into Q&A, and let me just confirm everybody can see what I'm sharing on the screen.
You're good to go, GT.
Okay. So we'll step through this pretty quick. Want to leave plenty of time to discuss. So here's a shot of the two pilot turbines sort of on the cover page. I think folks have seen this. And these are the two 6 megawatt turbines, so 12 megawatts in total, that were installed last year. Began producing power in October and were approved for commercial operations by Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in January. So these are the first turbines in federal waters. So it is a research lease that we're in cooperation with the Department of Mines, Mineral Energy. So these two are 27 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach. And we are picking up lessons learned off of these two turbines that are helping us inform the approach to the commercial project. So the commercial project, you see the map on the screen here. It's going to be 2.6 gigawatts. So it'll be approximately 180 Siemens Gamesa turbines rated at 14 megawatts, but they got a power boost to get the power up slightly higher than that. It would power up to 660,000 homes in the Dominion system at its peak output, and we're scheduled to complete them in 2026. So again, just to give you a size or a relative feel for the scale of this, it's the 113,000 acres would be the size of 85,000 football fields, right? So on the map too, just to show you, you've got that offshore area where the turbines are located. Those are the yellow circles. Offshore substations are the green squares in that area. And then the yellow corridor coming back to shore, that's where we put export cables. So there'd be 9 export cables coming back to shore, lands at the State Military Reservation, otherwise known as Camp Pendleton. And then we convert to the onshore electrical interconnection, ultimately winding up at a substation named Fentress, which is in Chesapeake. So the onshore routes are, they'll be reviewed by the State Corporation Commission. We put a variety of them in, and we'll ultimately settle on and be approved to build one of those routes. Okay, so let's talk a bit about schedule. So we've held this lease area since 2013, and did a survey and analysis program that allows us to sort of investigate the lease area and inform BOEM and the public about what that lease area looks like for bottom conditions, mammals, etc. So we announced the project in September of 2019 at its full scale. That's when we put in the request to the regional transmission operator to interconnect. And then there was legislation, the Virginia Clean Economy Act passed in 2020 that supports and calls for up to 5.2 gigawatts of offshore wind. So this project would be the first half of that. We submitted our construction operation plan, which is the document that the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management uses to review the project for the National Environmental Policy Act. Submitted that in December of 2020. Then we revised it in June, and BOEM issued a notice of intent, which kicked off the federal environmental review. So in the first half of 2020, we were also out doing a lot of public meetings, onshore field surveys to help form up those onshore routes I mentioned to you. And we've also been working to get to executable contracts for all the major equipment packages. Carl will talk to that here in a minute. So we also then have a state process that we're going through. So we will submit the state filing to the State Corporation Commission for the full project, right, offshore and onshore, and then the certificate of public convenience and necessity, which covers the onshore routing. That'll go in the fourth quarter. I should have updated that from second half. It'll go in the fourth quarter of this year, and that's about a 1-year process. So you see that we get that decision in 2022. For the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, that process will take a couple of years to get through draft environmental impact statements, and then the final and record of decision that would come out in the summer of 2023. So we start the onshore transmission construction in late 23, start offshore construction in early 24, and then so we've got the construction happening from 2024 through 2026 for the various major components, and we're fully in service by late 26. So since the Friday forum that we had in February, a number sort of highlights, right? That notice of intent from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We've got the contracts progressing. I'll talk a little bit later in the discussion about the lease that we signed with Portsmouth Marine Terminal. So those are all advancing, and let me sort of show you here just scale of the equipment, right? So you've probably seen the graphic where the pilot turbines are just over 600 feet tall. So that's roughly the Washington Monument. But then the commercial project, those turbines will be a little bit over 800 feet tall. And then ocean depth for the whole lease area of like 70 to 120 feet. But just wanted to give you a sense of scale. The picture on the right is our team over on a visit when we were inspecting the nacelles, right? So sort of that power hub up on the top of the wind turbine tower. like a 3-story structure. So just to give you a little bit of scale on that. And then Carl, let me turn it over to you, let you talk a bit about the major packages.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, GT. And again, thanks everyone for joining. And again, I know that everyone's listening to us, but if you do have questions as we go along, feel free to type them in the chat. I got the chat thing on the side. So if you have questions on anything I talk about, please just throw them out there. I'll see if I can answer them. If I ignore you, it's because maybe I can't answer that question directly, but I'll let you know that if I see one. So I think back in February, there are a lot of questions about what we were currently doing. And we were just really starting to get into the contracts for major construction. And these are the primary contracts, the big ticket items, trying to get everything locked in so that we can then filter down. And I know a lot of people on this call are wondering about the secondary work, some of the work that will impact Virginia more, where local groups can start getting involved. And I can talk about that a little bit also. But the graphic that GT's showing is a great way for everyone to kind of see, hey, what are we really working on? What are we doing right now? And it's the first step. So as you can imagine, and many people probably have seen, our preferred supplier agreement, we went with Siemens Gamesa for those wind turbine generators. And those wind turbines, the picture that GT just showed of the nacelle, Siemens Gamesa would provide the nacelle, the blades, and that tower. So if you take that left corner box, wind turbine generators, it's everything in there. So they have that little flange joint all the way up to the nacelle, and they'll be building most of that stuff. I'm going to say most of it in Europe. We do have some agreements that we're trying to work through and help out with for some more U.S. content, and we might be able to touch upon that, but I'll leave that up to GT. But in general, a lot of this stuff is going to be fabricated over in Europe, and then it's going to be transported over. We're going to be storing it at Portsmouth Marine Terminal. They'll be doing a lot of pre-assembly before it then goes out into the field. But before all that happens, we also have our, this picture kind of only shows a little bit of the monopiles and TPs. These two pieces, when I say TPs, I mean transition piece. And then monopiles is your main foundation. So that contract has been signed. That is actually being fabricated in Germany. So these are the large steel foundations that are going in. And to give you scale on that, because everyone's probably wondering, what are we talking about when we talk about foundations? You're probably talking over, I want to say, what is it? About 1,500 tons of steel just for your foundations. I think it's like 1,460 is where we really get into on actual steel amounts. But that steel has to start being procured today so that we can get it in the market. They can roll it and then actually start fabricating it, which is actually rolling it, putting it together, and make these huge, long foundation joints. Once that's done, once again, that'll be transported over, stored at Portsmouth Marine Terminal, and then shuttled out to the leased area and put into place. Transition pieces. So that one we're I want to say right there and getting that contract signed. So I can't tell everyone who we're going with just yet. Possibly in another week or two, we'd be able to disclose some of that. But right now, I'm still not allowed to tell you who we're talking to. But it's right on the cusp of being signed. So we've been working really hard. We were hoping to get things kind of taken care of through the summer. But as I told many people who were on the call back in February, you're dealing with European entities in a lot of ways. There's different contracting structures, and they had a vacation that pretty much closes down Europe around August. So around July, and pretty much we lost a huge piece of the summer trying to get some contracting done. Which one, I'm for people taking their vacation, but it makes it really hard in the U.S. mentality. Hey, we gotta get this stuff done and taken care of. So we're working through it, but we're almost done there. But the transition pieces, again, they're coming from Europe in that area, and those will be fabricated again. These are large pieces of steel. When you start talking about TPs, I'm talking about 800 tons of steel just to create all the TPs. And in that transition piece, it's the bolted joint from your foundation, and it's that transition from the foundation up to the tower. So we're building all those. Inside that also has all the switch gear. So when you look at your generator at top, you have cables that come down and go to the switch gear inside the transition piece, which then transition all the way down into your export cables that go out. So those contracts we're working on. And then there's also the offshore substation, which we're working on
Carl, I'm going to add a couple of the questions in chat. So folks are asking about the HDD, which is the horizontal directional drill. So maybe we could change the label on this because punch out's it's kind of a term we use, but so that export cable that you see on the map that's coming from the offshore substations, we'll get close to shore and then we'll do a horizontal directional drill from slightly offshore. It'll go underneath the beach area and the dunes at the State Military Reservation, and then it hits that cable landing location. And then we transition from subsea cable to onshore cable, and that's why you see an onshore export cable labeled. So the HDD, that's just the area where the HDD physically will come out offshore. That's what that label is intended to mean. And again, I'm just sort of being a little bit looking at our diagram. We maybe should show that line a little bit different, right? Because it'll be deeper as it goes on that HDD toward the shore. But there's also a question about depth of cables, what they'll be buried underneath the ocean floor. So the inner array cables that go from turbine to turbine and then into the offshore substation, our target depth on those will be 5 to 6 feet deep. And Carl mentioned the scour protection, so they'll also be
1.8 meters.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to do US versus metric, but yeah. So there you go on the inner array cable, and then the export cable will be generally at a similar depth. We actually do a cable burial risk assessment that takes marine traffic, the sort of shifting of the sea floor, ocean currents, that kind of stuff into account when we get those target depths. But that export cable will also go to some greater depths in certain areas. There is actually a dredge disposal area that we cross as we're coming to shore. So we're likely to go a little deeper there. And then the horizontal directional drill obviously goes much deeper. So just wanted to hit those two where we're on this slide.
Yeah, so there's a couple questions. So I'm going through some of these. There's a Q&A, and then there's the chat. So I'm making sure I'm hitting all these. One item was, hey, what's the schedule for the TNI contracts? What I can tell you is the schedule was last month. The schedule is as soon as we can get it closed out. We have a couple minor items that we're trying to adjust overall. I would say our schedule right now is to have our contracts in place by end of this month as best we can. Obviously, I'm not going to sign a contract that we feel we're not ready to sign. So we're right there. But what we've been pushing for is the end of this month to be done with the TNI contracts. I'm trying to read some of these other ones that we have here. Plans for U.S. vessels. This is always the question that we get on how we're transporting materials from Europe to U.S. And obviously, I believe some of this is talking about the Jones Act and its role within the commercial offshore wind project that we have. So right now, our plan, and that's why we're using Portsmouth Marine Terminal as a assembling hub. So items from Europe, the plan is we have European vessels picking up from Europe and then transporting to Portsmouth Marine Terminal. Now, at that terminal, we would plan to house the TPs, the towers for the turbines, nacelles, blades, foundations. That can all come over from Europe directly to Portsmouth Marine Terminal, and now it's at a U.S. port. We have different strategies on actual construction because of some of the Jones Act requirements. So in some instances, we are performing barges, U.S. Jones Act compliant barges from Portsmouth Marine out to installation site.
Yeah,
and then
no, you didn't alarm me. Let me just turn. I'm listening to a meeting. Yeah, even though I have this up on, it's okay. It's okay. You wouldn't know that.
Hold on a second. I want to make sure we can mute somebody. So the idea is to, in some instances, like I said, we'd use U.S. Jones Act compliant feeder barges out to our lease, possibly for, I'll say, installation of foundations, for example, in which we could use a European vessel that sits out there and never comes to a U.S. port, but can put it in a foundation. Scour protection, I know that if those who've been involved in some of the Jones Act items knows that scour protection is an area that we're looking at closely on what can be done and where scour can be sourced and used. And there have been, I'll say, announcements of potential fall pipe vessels in construction. I know of one for a fact in a shipyard near the same one that's building our vessel. So I know that there are fall pipe vessels that could be available that we could do Jones Act compliant scour protection. And then obviously someone asked, hey, does Charybdis have a role? Charybdis, of course, is a potential. You have to realize that Charybdis is on our, I'll say, unregulated side or non-regulated side of Dominion. So Dominion started this process of Charybdis because we saw a need and we saw how the Jones Act would actually impact that installation. Once you have a foundation or TP, we know that is a point in U.S. waters, and therefore a vessel going to that point would need to be Jones Act compliant. Otherwise, you'd have to go use a whole different method, such as possibly feeder barges from a whole nother location. And to be honest with you, I think we've said this in several venues. Dominion looked at feeder barges for actual installation of towers and nacelles and blades, and we've looked at that and said that is not an efficient or proper way to actually install this type of equipment. And when you really think about it, and if people have looked at what it takes to install a blade on a nacelle and that intricate amount of movement to make sure that, hey, all of these bolts fit up with the blade and make sure that it's safe and reliable when you're working on it, Dominion said, hey, this is the proper way to go. So Charybdis is, like I said, the non-regulated side of Dominion, and it was a move for the offshore wind industry. So we built that, or we are building that currently, and I can let people know that it is on time. It's going out well. The idea wasn't talk directly on Charybdis on this call, but for those who are wondering about it, things are looking good for Charybdis to meet its scheduled dates of what we expected to come out. But our idea of Charybdis is since it is an affiliate of Dominion, we do have to ask for permission to use such a vessel on the commercial offshore wind project from Dominion. So that is one thing. Dominion actually asked to enter into a contract with Charybdis. We have to make sure that is the proper, I'll say, method for the State Corporation Commission. Show that, hey, this is not only safe, but the proper costs, and that the State Corporation agrees with us, and then we could actually use Charybdis. So it is another contract we have to do to get Charybdis on to the offshore wind project. But I hope that helps understand where we're going with that. So we're using multiple methods, and Charybdis does have a role to play as long as it makes sense for our ratepayers and the overall project.
Hey, Carl, let me to that point. In the Virginia Clean Economy Act, right, there's provisions where we have to show competitive procurement, including for Charybdis, like you're saying. But so that is a factor. But there's also some questions in chat about bringing local content and how the suppliers will connect. But before I ask you to talk a bit about those connections to what we call the tier 1 suppliers, right, those major contracts. The Virginia Clean Economy Act also looks to us without a hard target, but to use our best efforts, working with economic development entities in Virginia, working with folks to develop this local content, right? So we are talking to some fairly large folks about the opportunity to bring potential manufacturing of components over to the Hampton Roads area, be it through Port of Virginia sites or some other sites that folks are developing. And we're also going to connect and reach out, and this is where I'll sort of hand it back to Carl about getting folks connected to our tier 1 suppliers to bring that local content in. But a little bit of it on the pilot project, right? Using vessels for scouting, and as Ørsted was our contractor, they were connected, and we worked with Virginia Maritime Association, Hampton Roads Alliance, et cetera, to make sure we were making those connections and giving people opportunity to come in and participate. But Carl, sorry, I've said I'm going to hand it to you like 3 times, so now I will.
No, sure. Yeah. So in general, what's going to happen, and realize because of the scale of the Dominion commercial project, these contracts are going out early, earlier than I think people would have kind of expected for some of these fabricators of the large steel. I know there's some questions in here about why Europe, and I'll get into that a little bit. But so once we get T&I contracts in place, once we get the foundation contracts and TP contracts and everything kind of in place, what you'd probably see happening is, I'll say in a year's time or a little later, there's already been some coming over to Virginia ports to kind of look around, but they're going to have to start getting the secondary contracts in place. And some of these, GT talked a little bit about the vessels, but there's more vessels than I think a lot of people think about when you start thinking about the guard vessels we need to have in place to guard against other vessels coming into the lease when we're doing construction. So we're going to have guard vessels, we have support vessels, we have crew transfer vessels. There's, of course, what I talked about, fall pipe vessels, you have subsea investigation vessels, we're going to have cable lay vessels, we're going to have to do UXO surveying, UXO identification, UXO removal. And those who don't know what UXO is, that's a unidentified, what is it? I'll just say it's the potential of an ordnance down there, or I can't remember but unexploded ordnance.
Unexploded ordnance, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Trying to get all the the amount of acronyms we have on these projects is ridiculous. So I'm trying to keep them all straight in my head. And I don't like using acronyms on those who are not directly involved in it, because then you're wondering what in the world is Carl talking about. So regarding all of those vessels, all of those things need to be in place. So what we plan to have in the future is we've talked to each of these suppliers that we're dealing with, and they want to do this also, which is have, I'll say, we don't always call them labor fairs, but a fair to allow local business, so that all the other integral things that they need, they can come to Virginia Port knowing that we're going to be at Portsmouth Marine Terminal and start talking about, hey, who else is out here that they can use? And we plan to do that. Well, of course, I'll walk through our corporate communications group, and of course, everyone on this call would have purview to them to be able to say, hey, here's what we're planning to do, here's the time frame we're planning to do it, so that you can talk directly with some of these suppliers and tell them, hey, this is what we do, and how can we get involved with you, or how can we at least step up and be there for you and be some of the first people that they're talking to. Right now, I think it's similar to where I was in February when I was talking about this, which is we're still trying to get the contract in place. And many of you know, once you get a contract in place, there's a time frame that it takes them to, all right, now we have the contract, let's really formulate the strategy and find time frames to say, here's what we have to start doing, and here's all the parts and pieces we need from the local content area. So that is coming there, and obviously we are looking at UXO vendors that can do the survey, can do the investigation, because that's stuff that we need to start probably within the end of this year and the beginning of next year. So we're actually out there looking at, hey, who are these suppliers that we can either offer to our T&I group, or Dominion may go ahead and pull this in and look at it directly to kind of make sure, hey, we want to be involved in this and know exactly where it is. So we are starting to case the area for certain suppliers that we can hand names directly over. So there's certain pieces that we're looking at within this project. I think that answers. I know I'm saying a lot, and I'm trying to keep up with everything that's coming in both the QA and the chat. So I want to make sure I answer a lot of people's questions as they're coming in. Yeah, and I think that, Melvin, you're talking about, hey, what's the best method to contact some of these prime suppliers? And I think I said this back in February too, is once we have these contracts signed, the idea is to announce these for everybody. And for example, I can say that we're planning to announce who the foundation supplier was. We're planning to announce who the T&I supplier is. We're planning to announce who the TP supplier is. Most people are already aware Siemens Gamesa is our preferred supplier that we're working with on the turbines. So you'll have these big names, and it's relatively easy to ask us later on, okay, now that you've told us who these are, is there a contact we can have? And we can provide that contact. Usually that's part of the whole kickoff that we have for communication with each of these. Say, hey, who would you like us to hand local content guys over so they can talk directly to whomever that supplier is? Dr. Christopher, I'm going to send you a private chat on that one. So I see your note on who can you talk to about UXO suppliers. I'll give that name out because I know we are looking right now within Dominion. So I'll give you a name here in a little bit. Let's see. Did I miss anything, GT? I know what happens here when I start reading questions. I start jumping all over the map, and I'm trying to keep up with everyone at the same time.
Yeah, Carl, I'm understanding think there was a question from it's an anonymous ask, but sort of asking about our 2026 target and whether that's firm. I would say yes, it's firm. In the Virginia Clean Economy Act, there is a date by which we have this first 2.6 gigawatts in service. And it's actually 1 year later, right? The date is January 1st of 2028. But obviously we've been working on the regulatory schedule, both the federal process through the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and our state process with the State Corporation Commission. And we've been working cooperatively with both groups on what we expect the review times to be. And we feel confident that as long as we keep doing our job about providing sufficient information to those regulators and coordinating agencies, that the permitting schedule supports what we're doing on the contracting side to have material fabricated and available to install to hit that target. So yeah, we're confident in that target. And I'd say, the risks to the timeline are us, I sort of mentioned it here. It's us doing our job to be transparent and provide information about the budget, the schedule, and the process by which we go through the permitting to folks and do our job as Dominion, which we take pride in. You've seen us sort of do it over the years on a variety of generation and electric transmission projects where we're being clear to folks about what the project is, what it contains, and how we're going to execute it. So it's really an obligation to our project team to get that done on the timeline. You're asking about another offshore wind project. That's an interesting one, right? Like the Virginia Clean Economy Act looks to 5.2 gigawatts of offshore wind. So there are conversations happening between folks at the state level here in Virginia and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management about the potential for another lease area off of Virginia. And so we will be supporting and tracking that process. But it goes through a whole federal process about identifying and issuing a lease area. So that'd be sort of where the next phase comes on a lease area off of Virginia. Carl, I don't know if you saw anything else you wanted to try and pick up in chat. I need to scan back, like you were saying, since I was.
Mute. Yeah, I was doing the same thing. I'm trying to scan back and forth. Environmental have been work.
Yeah, I do see one, environmental agencies that we've been working with. Yeah, so I mean, both federal and state, right? A whole bevy. And this is one of the benefits of having done the pilot project with both BOEM and the state, right? So I'll miss some, but I'll rattle them off, right? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service, Environmental Protection Agency, because even though this is renewable clean power, we do have vessels going back and forth to the site, so we track emissions. We're going to have an emergency diesel generator on the offshore substation, so that needs to get permitted. But it is a relatively clean project, but we do go through the EPA. On the state level, the Department of Environmental Quality, we work with the Mines, Mineral, and Energy, who will soon be known as Energy Virginia, Department of Historic Resources. We're looking at terrestrial and offshore archaeological impacts. We look at the sea floor. We look at the marine mammals, birds, bats, etc. So quite a long list. And actually, in our construction operation plan, there is a table near the front of that document that talks about all these different coordinating agencies and how we interact with them. Army Corps of Engineers. I don't know how I could have missed that one, right? But quite a long list of groups that are involved as coordinating
Yeah, so I'm actually typing a couple answers to specifically to people in the QA. Joan, you asked what's the commitment to use more local sub. I think what you're trying to get to is local content. So within each of our contracts, we are looking at the areas that we can utilize local content. And so again, there's a couple questions like why Europe, why not this? And I answered one person, which was, currently when you look at some of the scope items that we have, and I'll say the foundations and TPs, for example. And I wish I had a better picture of a foundation. I got one on my phone. It's not actually on my laptop to kind of show everybody. When you look at some of the forming of these foundations, the size and thickness of the steel we're talking about, currently the U.S. fabricators don't have the capability. Now there are several groups that are looking at implementing new fabricators within the U.S. that would allow this type of work. Currently, in the time frame we're trying to contract to get there, that work is not available in the U.S. But that's why we start looking at everything else. What can we actually do with U.S. content when it starts coming to U.S. labor? When you start looking at all the different vessels that we're talking about and all the different work, and we actually are looking more at some of the after construction areas too, in our operations group when it starts coming to all the O&M and maintenance. So we have a large commitment to try and do as much as we can in U.S. content. There's been a lot of talk about scour. How much can we get scour into the U.S.? Obviously, Jones Act plays a role in this, and some of the rulings play a role in this and what we can do. And when we start looking at what we're trying to do with Portsmouth Marine Terminal, and again, I'm being a little cagey because there's definitely some people that are looking to utilize Portsmouth Marine Terminal and bring new fabrication, new potential work into the area. I'm not a purview to talk about all of those things right now, but what I can tell you is we have a pretty large commitment to get as much U.S. content as we can that is viable and makes sense on our projects into the U.S. And we've been working pretty hard with even European suppliers to bring work over to the U.S. Cables, for example. So I know there's a lot of questions about it and why we have to do this, but realize in the framework of offshore wind, this is the beginning. And I think I talked about a lot of this in February too, is in the beginning, everything happens to be in Europe right now. And as people see the differences of what you got to do in Europe and what we have available in the US, we actually have to, build the US local content supply chain up that allows us to take more, simply allows us to utilize local content because it's more available. So what you're kind of seeing is a shift from all these European suppliers need to come over and at least help the US get where it needs to be able to supply some of these big primary contracts, such that it filters even more into secondary. But we are working really hard to make sure all these secondary contracts, everything that is US content available is taken advantage of. I hope that helps answer your question, Joan.
And then Joan, you teed us up really well. We haven't talked about fishing yet, but we do. Hold on, I'm trying to advance here. I'm stuck. There we go. All right. Whoop, sorry, went too far now. So folks often ask us about fishing at the wind turbines, right? And now these are recreational fishing. I'm going to come back to commercial in a second. But these are just a few photos from trips that we've been out, either on some of the trips we've taken with stakeholders out there or our maintenance folks working. But you see the attraction of fishing vessels, recreational fishing vessels. You can come right up proximate to the turbines, and folks are catching quite a bit out there already. And I'm going to queue up a video here in a second that we just took during foundation installation that shows sort of the marine life. The most interesting one is this guy on the wave runner. I mean, that guy came out 27 miles offshore on that wave runner, and our folks that were out there working on the turbines were like, "Hey, you got enough gas to get back, right?" So, but they're really drawing stuff in. And then if you search YouTube, you see down here, there's a group out of Virginia, the Matador is the name of the vessel. And they've got videos of their folks actually spear fishing, doing some free diving right at the base of the turbine to actually to get fish. So So on the recreational side, it's drawing in quite a bit. Now on the commercial side, we are working with a couple of commercial fisheries to work on baselining their catches in the past, sort of what the conditions are before we install the larger project, and be able to have data with them and work with them collaboratively on what impact it might have to their fishery. So that'll be an ongoing effort. We don't have quite the amount of commercial fishing activity that some of the leases up in the Northeast have, but it's there, and it's part of our obligation as the review process and mitigations with stakeholders to work with them. So we'll keep doing that. But let me, I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and flip over and let this video run while Carl and I can keep trying to answer other questions. So as I tee this up, this video is taken a couple of weeks ago. We go inspect the foundation and the scour protection on the turbine. So we had somebody inside Dominion that clipped together about a minute of different depths as you move down the turbine. So it'll start near the top of the water and move down, and you'll eventually see scour protection. We'll just let that run. I'll keep the audio off, and Carl and I can keep answering questions. Sorry, I'm in and out of my mute. Anything else you saw in the Q&A, or maybe Matt or Carmen or anybody else that might be monitoring it? Anything you think we ought to try and address?
For GT, question that had, I think I had actually, as as you've seen the project progress, and you all have been working with contractors, very curious about how you've seen the industry's view of Virginia change over that time period, if at all. And I think that'll speak to the viability of Hampton Roads potentially as a supply chain hub, maybe.
Yeah, I can start, and then I'll let GT add in his view also. So I will tell you that every talk I've been on, and every time I've been talking a little bit about Hampton Roads, Portsmouth Marine Terminal, the view has been, and everyone I've talked to, even on the European supply, is they are excited about what Portsmouth Marine Terminal brings and is actually doing for the industry. I think during the IPF conference, there was an opportunity for several people to come down and view Portsmouth Marine Terminal, Hampton Roads in general, and each and every time you talk to someone, the answer was, "Wow, that's what we need. That's what the industry needs. That's how offshore wind hubs really get started." And I said it. I think I even said it on a workboat panel at one point about what we needed and what Virginia offered. When it came to deep water, a way in, no bridges in the way, lots of room, industry right there. What I've seen is that's why people are looking to bring business. And I'll say, when I say business, I'm thinking about larger fabrication over to the Virginia area. What Dominion's doing in health is we're trying to keep our rates low, and power prices are great for industry. So we're helping out there. I think one thing that I think a lot of people are working with is how do they talk to specific economic pieces to get themselves better aligned with what they have to do to bring something large like a foundation fabricator over to Virginia. If they want to build nacelles, or they want to build TPs and make that hub, those businesses, when they want to build up that piece, a U.S. supply, they do try to figure out who do they talk to and how do they get in touch with them. Dominion's doing what we can to kind of send them over to the right person. But I would say that everyone listening here, you can do a quick search and say, here are your main suppliers out there doing offshore wind big pieces. And don't be afraid to call them up and say, hey, are you looking to build something in the US? Are cable manufacturers wanting to build new cable, not installation, fabrication in the US? I know for a fact they are. They're looking at different states. They're trying to figure out how to do it. They know that Virginia's here, but I think they struggle a little bit with who do they talk to, because they don't see Dominion as the main link. We're not the wheelers and dealers trying to line everyone up. We're doing a project and we're doing a lot of stuff for that. And they think that we're a customer of them. We're not the one that should be doing their development or their projects. So I think that's one link that I think we need to figure out how to help out in Virginia overall, to make sure that everyone's going to the right people at the right times. GT, do you have a view on that too?
Yeah, I think the other piece to supplement, Carl, is the MOU between Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina to get some regionality to offshore wind, right? Because there's a lot of states that are out there trying to bring economic development to their state. I mean, obviously that's their jobs, right? Bring jobs to the states. But I think there's also a recognition in the industry that this regional approach between Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina is helpful as well, right? Because we've got our lease area. Kitty Hawk, Avangrid has their lease area in Kitty Hawk just off North Carolina. There's several projects with developers off of Maryland. So the wind hub at Portsmouth Marine Terminal that has the advantages like you mentioned, right? Good deep draft, maritime workforce, no overhead, plus being able to get some credit potentially across those states. I think that's attractive to some of these folks looking to site facilities.
Those are great points, both Carl and GT. And I'll say to the point of the work that's being done to establish Virginia as a supply chain hub. The Hampton Roads Alliance, along with partners like the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, Virginia Energy, the Port of Virginia, the Virginia Maritime Association, we're all working hard to make sure that we're displaying our assets to these folks that may want to do these major projects in Virginia, letting them know about our workforce, our physical infrastructure. So that work is being done outside of Dominion, also with Dominion and our partners. So I think we're close to our hour. I really want to thank GT and Carl for all their fantastic insight. I want to apologize again for a bit of technical difficulties at the start, and let you know a little bit about a change in the forum that we'll have going forward, in that we've been focusing mainly on supply chain issues through this year. Going forward, we'll be going on an every other month schedule and partnering with the Hampton Roads Workforce Council. They will be partnering again with Dominion Energy to talk about job creation and workforce development around offshore wind. And I'll leave it with Steve Cook, Chief Innovation Officer with the Hampton Roads Workforce Council, to tell you a little bit about their plans.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and good morning, everybody. Just real quick, next month, October 13th, from 9 a.m. To 10 a.m., we will hold our first Workforce Wednesday. So we're happy to be doing that along with our partners at Dominion. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Exodus job study again, maybe diving a little bit deeper into that. Our outreach efforts, Vernon Tillage with the Alliance is going to be working with us as we're trying to really make sure that we're hitting all audiences and making sure opportunities available to everyone in this offshore wind industry as it comes to our region. And John Larson's going to talk a little bit about the Clean Economy Act and how that and how workforce is an important component of that, and how we're going to make sure that we're outreaching again to our communities, not just in the Hampton Roads region, but also across the Commonwealth. So looking forward to next month, October 13th. Again, you'll be getting more information about that in the next week or so.
Great, thanks a lot, Steve. Yep, and to the audience, you'll be receiving communications about that through the Alliance and the Workforce Council. So appreciate all the information from our panelists, and I will close out the September forum. Thanks again, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.